Hello, welcome to this month's Human Capital Watch. First, Happy New Year to all of you, welcoming in the 2019 year, and thank you for joining us for this series. As many of you know, this is our monthly Human Capital Watch series, where each month we present a current topic in human capital and HR challenges that are on the top of our minds. So thank you for joining us for today. We are very excited to be presenting our annual C-Suite Challenge 2019, Building a Future-Ready Organization. Before we jump into my guests as well as the content for today, let me take care of some of the webcast admin things. Those of you that are logging on for credit, you can see HRCI, SHRM, and CPE. Please do follow the instructions and we'll gladly credit you for your participation. The other things around the administration is you can download the webcast in the center pod of your screen, so you can take care of that. At the end of the webcast, we have a quick 3-second evaluation. Please do let us know how we're doing. We always appreciate your feedback. And finally, I really want to invite you to join us in this conversation because we have the little lower left-hand pod box where you can type in your questions and ask us what you're thinking or questioning for the content that we're presenting today. So please join us in this conversation. Okay, so with that, what are we talking about today? The C-Suite Challenge. Many of you may know this is an annual survey that we go out at the conference board and invite CEOs and other C-Suite executives to tell us what's going on in their minds, what's keeping them up at night, and what's a concern for their organizations. Some of you may know we've been doing this research since 1999. That's 20 years for this year. We're very proud of that. And so we have 20 years of data. Think about how interesting that would be to reflect upon research that's been going on for 20 years and the challenges and issues of the day. So what are we covering today? We're looking at some of the internal and external stressors that are causing CEOs to stay up at night. What do we think about this organization of the future from a 20-25-year perspective? I know many folks have been thinking about what 2020 looks like, but that's already next year, so we need to sort of take it to the next phase. What is the next couple of years are going to look like, and how will it challenge our organizations? How will it challenge ourselves and our employees? The HR executives, what we think from an innovation perspective, what's going to be a successful looking organization in 2025? Have we thought much about that and what we can do to prepare for that? And finally, an inclusive organization, very hot topic. So we'll explore that in more detail. So before I continue, let me introduce my guests. Chuck Mitchell is the Executive Director of Knowledge, Content, and Quality here at the Conference Board, and my colleague who's an author of this C-Suite Challenge report. And by the way, this has just come out, so it's brand new, hot off the press. We're very excited to be presenting to you. He has been intimately involved in this research for many years. So if anybody knows what's going on in the minds of C-suites, Chuck is it. So first, welcome and thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm looking forward to it. It's a lot of interesting data we got to get through today, so it's going to be fun.
Terrific. We're going to jump into it. There's going to be a lot of content. So just to set a little context before I have Chuck start telling us about what the findings of the study were, which is the setup of the research. So it's a survey that we roll out, as I already mentioned, for CEOs and C-suites around the world. We had 1,426 respondents this year, which is a really great response rate with over 800 CEOs around the world. And you'll see in the charts and graphs that come up, the breakdown globally, regionally, et cetera. So we'll touch upon that. Of course, those of you are all members of the conference board. The report will be out, and you will be able to download and be able to look at every chart and graph that we have. And so you can sort of digest that at your leisure. And finally, we noted and asked the executives not only about what's keeping them up at night for 2019, but again, what are their thoughts coming up for the future? What is this organization? What do their organizations look like for the current phase and for the future? So we'll also dig into that. All right, so with that, let me turn it over to Chuck and just sort of broadly speaking and start asking, Chuck, what are keeping CEOs up at night?
Thanks, Amy. There's a lot of things that are keeping CEOs up at night. But this year, interesting for these hot button issues, which we look at the more tactical issues that are going to keep them up at night for the coming year. This year, we broke the lists into two. We looked at external stressors and internal stressors. So let's start with the external stressors, and what a difference a year makes. This year, the recession risk has climbed to the top of those external stressors. Last year, in the overall list, it was 19th. So we're seeing a jump in concern over the overall macroeconomic environment. And what's also creeped up is the threat to global trade systems. I mean, as we know with the China-U.S. And the Trump administration in Washington taking a tariff-type policy towards global trade, there's a lot of concern about global trade, especially when you look at China too. The export orientations. Companies in firms in emerging Asia are particularly concerned about the threats to global trade. And also in this macro is the whole notion of political instability, and I think that has a lot to do with everything from concern here in the U.S. About political stability to political stability around Brexit in Europe, and plus you have issues and concerns in China as well. Right, so those three kind of issues have really accelerated in concern for CEOs when it comes to the external environment. In previous years, pretty much all three of those had been lowered down on the list, and so this year we see a real jump in that concern over the macro issue. And so when we look at HR executives, again, there's also concern about the macro, about the recession risk side. A little bit more concern on the HR side about new competitors, and that's really kind of linked to the whole notion of digital transformation and those kinds of issues, right? The notion of new competitors really exasperating the labor market shortages and tightness too, with new competitors emerging. And there's also a concern among HR executives around cybersecurity, which is kind of an interesting notion.
Yeah. If I can jump in a second, Chuck. Your highlight of how different those top issues are from last year to this year is, I mean, it's just completely, like you said, it's what a big difference a year makes. It's completely different. And of course, many of you at the Conference Board know we have an economics powerhouse team of researchers, and we provide a lot of data around this. So even HR executives, everybody around the world is really concerned. I would encourage, of course, all of us to take a little bit closer look at some of the economics data. But I know that even for myself, as I read the press or I look at the economics data, it's really confusing. We're seeing mixed messages. So there is recession risk, but yet, maybe the economy is not so bad because the job market is hot. And so, how do you, if you had a bit of advice, how do you think we should make sense of this, especially from the HR perspective?
Yeah, I mean, our macro data shows that there really is not an imminent recession risk in 2019. We expect slowdowns globally and in the U.S. In the second half of 2019. But the fundamentals are basically sound. A lot of this has to do with the psychology behind it. And, one of the issues that when you look at hot button issues versus planning for the future, that these hot button issues sometimes take on more importance and overwhelm the long-term strategic planning. So that's always a danger that we could think ourselves into a recession, we could think ourselves into pulling back on business investment when even though the fundamentals are still sound. And we'll see later in the data that issue between the short-term performance and long-term vision is a real struggle that CEOs are facing. They always have, but this year it seems to be really much on their mind too. So a lot of it's a psychological aspect of it right now.
Great to keep in mind and to obviously keep a pulse check on it. Great. Oh, so let's take an audience poll question. So if you can see the question that is being asked of you, rank the top 2 hot button issues that you believe will require your greatest attention in the coming year for 2019 within your organization. And you can see the different choices. everything from creating new business models, diversity, wages, retention of top talent, alignment of compensation, developing next generation leaders, reduction of cost, compliance. And let's give it another 5 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, all of you, to make your choices. And if the control room would close it out, that would be great. Terrific. So thank you, all of you. So you can see that the number one option or number one choice for all of you as a struggle is attraction and retention of top talent, follow closely behind with creating new business models because of disruptive technologies. And also developing next generation leaders. Well, I think that would lead right into Chuck, your next slide. And thank you to the audience. Please continue to participate. We invite you to type in your questions in the lower left-hand corner.
Yeah, I think it's a case of great minds think alike here, right? So when we look at the internal stressors, right, both on the CEO and the HR side, it's about talent and attraction and retention of talent and top talent. It's always been an issue in the course of our 20 years. I think what's kind of interesting is that we've seen over the last few years is this changing in the definition of talent for CEO views. There used to be a lot of focus on high potential leader development. And more so now, we're seeing a broader definition of talent. It's down to the rank and file, it's critical skills. And this notion of attraction, retention of top talent surfaces not only as an internal stressor here, but we'll see it in the course of other responses. The talent issue, the people issue, really is noticeable in the focus of CEOs in things like innovation, in things like sustainability. So it's really an interesting notion. The new business models. It goes back to the notion of digital transformation and disruptive technologies. Very much on the minds of CEOs. It has been for the last couple of years. It's also very much on the mind of HR executives as well. And tied closely to that, really is that development of the next generation leaders. That in order to get through a digital transformation and in order to revise and create new business models, it requires a new set of skills. It requires a new brand, a new style of leadership, if you will. And those three are all closely linked. And it's interesting that our audience pretty much tracks the results of our broader audience in the survey. So. Well done.
Yeah, right. But I only think that supports how dominant those top three issues are, because the rest of the audience polling showed much smaller percentages in the other issues.
Right.
These were so prominently, as well as in our survey, the labor challenges, the quick speed and change of organizations, these just continue to resonate very strongly across all our HR folks. And the good news is that there's a lot of great work to be done for HR executives, right? Lots of great work to be done, and it doesn't seem like it's slowing down anytime soon. There's desperate need for all of your great minds, so keep doing what you're thinking. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting, when you look at that HR executive column, there's a couple of things that jumped out at us. That one was the workforce diversity, which was ranked 9th by CEOs globally. Is higher on the list of HR executives at 6th, and that's something that I guess we would expect to some extent. There's a much more focus and maybe a greater understanding on the value of diversity and inclusion when it comes to business outcomes on the HR side. The other notion too, and I'll have to apologize for what's ranked at number 11 for CEOs. It's 13th is the wage increases. Tight labor market, we see from our macroeconomic data, the pressure on wages going up, the pressure on corporate profits. And this has been true for the last couple of years, yet it still doesn't grab the attention yet of CEOs, and to some extent it's not grabbing the attention of HR executives as yet. So, that's a point that I think is worth bearing attention to, that impact of wage increases in the U.S. especially, but also in developing Asia and China in particular is something that's going to be it needs attention to be paid to. And then that notion of compliance with data privacy regulations. Um, higher in Europe because of the GDPR, the issues there, but still, when it comes to ranking internal hot button issues for HR executives, the data privacy thing is not yet resonating as a serious issue right now with them. So I think those are two interesting counterpoints, if you will.
And I wondered, is it just the lack of, like the GDPR specifically? We actually did a report on GDPR and human capital analytics this past year, and I wondered if it's just not in full awareness of our HR professionals and colleagues, how much of an issue it can be for the work that we do in HR and the data that we have, right, and what is allowed and not allowed, with these new regulations.
Right, and I think I think it's a mix. I think in a lot of organizations that there is awareness and that they are addressing those issues. They have a handle on it, so it may not be that much of a problem because they feel they have a better handle on it. I think when we look at the data, when we look at revenue cuts and revenue cut sizes, it's more of an issue for those mid-level companies that are operating internationally. It's a concern still. They may not have the resources or put the resources towards it. So okay, that is the issue. But it's something that's affecting everybody and going to have more impact going forward. So if we looked at, as I say, the theme for this year, we really wanted to have CEOs and C-suite executives get a broader view of where their organizations or what their organizations are going to look like in 2025 and what they need to do to get out there and remain competitive. And so when we pull all the responses together, these are the highlights of what really, in the view of CEOs, that successful organizations in 2025 will do. And as I mentioned earlier, it's achieving that balance, that not letting the tactical get in the way of that long-term vision, and that was seen as their number one hallmark of a successful organization in the future in 2025. That they will actually get that balance right, and also crops up in the innovation side too. It's just kind of interesting. It's about customer centricity, but more so about, this is the digital transformation, the digital economy. It's that notion of servitization of products. It's transforming the relationship between what today's customer, a one-time transaction view, versus a long-term relationship with a company, and that servitization of products. That, I think a great example is Diageo has produced one of my friends, Johnny Walker. His whiskey, the whiskey bottle is a smart bottle. So what happens is not only does it feed it has a sensor in the bottle, and once you take it home, once you open the bottle, it will feed to your cell phone, your mobile phone, cocktail recipes. So that's the sort of servitization, the smart product development that they see as really being important, and we're seeing a really big move towards away from the product centricity to the servitization, and they feel that that's a real hallmark of a successful organization. More importantly, it's redefining how work's going to be done in 2025, and the nexus comes around agile fluid teams. We see that not on the CEO view, but certainly in the HR view as well. Fundamental changes. That the blurring of the internal and external boundaries, and fading of hierarchies, the flexible structures that support those agile teams. Again, in the CEO view, very critical to future success. That's what a successful organization is going to look like. The functions will be leaner as AI starts to come in, and it's interesting. The procurement function. We've done a lot of work on the procurement with our procurement groups in Europe and in the U.S. And when they look out 8 years or so, they really see their functions changing, right? That it does become leaner, there's less, but AI does all the contract negotiation, so it maximizes the benefits for both sides, which is currently a key function of the procurement side of the house. So that's how they look at it, that their roles and their relationships really change. Again, CEOs see that using technology to enhance collaboration, right? That's part of the agile and fluid teamwork, right? That you have to have those teams aligned, not only with the business strategy, but aligned together across. And they see technology as really being an important part of helping that collaboration. The faster decision making, agile methodologies and design thinking coming in as customers' demands and preferences shift at such great speed that in order to keep up, the notion of agile methodologies, that's the notion of testing, failing, and rebuilding on the fly, building the plane while it's flying, if you will, is critical. And all part of that is design thinking, is getting the customer input, and that is critical. And we'll see, from back in May, we had a joint strategic HR council meeting in Chicago. We had 250 senior HR executives there, and they saw agile methodology and design thinking within the HR function as being critical to future success. So it's not only enterprise wide, but even within the individual functions, that notion of agile is really important.
I'm just sort of reflecting on all of these bullet points that you're sharing with us, and obviously HR is probably in every single one of these. And just something around the teams and the agility of teams. We know, we've talked about it, but I know that it's gained a greater prominence, and it's going to push us as a function. So for example, when you talk about teams, yes, of course, everybody says teams is fabulous, but now we need to talk about the performance and measuring the performance of teams, which, as we all know, organizations still focus on the individual today. So how do we do that, right? So that really pushes us from an HR perspective. How do we reward? How do we measure? How do we assess teams collectively? And what does that mean for the rest of the organization? So these are very tactical issues, but at the heart of what this means, all of these bullet points have significant implications from an HR perspective, from a practice view, is what I'm pondering.
Right. Yeah, that notion of, it's interesting in the when you ask about the rewarding and recognizing rewarding work done in teams. When we asked about the human capital, the hallmarks of a successful organization via human capital, that recognition and reward, while agile teams are really important, the recognition reward is not so high on the list. So there's a bit of that disconnect, and I know, as you say, what talking to organizations, our members, that there's a struggle going on with how to do that right, and the way the performance management system's set up today, the head-to-head competition, the antithesis of collaboration. There's a way to go, and to be honest, it doesn't seem at this point in time, at least from my conversations, maybe yours too, that anyone has really cracked that nut yet.
That's right. That's exactly right. But that presents the inherent challenge. How are we supposed to become more agile? How are we supposed to become more team-centric if we can't figure out the supporting infrastructures around that? And so that definitely is a big problem that will continue to exist, and right. I agree.
Well, I know that we have, there's a project underway within the Conference Board. In fact, I've read the early draft of it, if you will, that is looking about the DNA, the engagement of teams. And there's some strategies around that as to how that can be done in the future. So it's still a work in progress, but stay tuned for that.
Yes, and it's coming out next month, I think.
Yeah.
So really stay tuned quickly.
Right. And the notion, I think what's interesting is those two, when we asked about where CEOs are looking to invest for staff development, leadership development, two things that come up high on the list is the notion of individual coaching, and then that cross-functional rotational experiences. Two things that we know from our research are really in the sweet spot for millennials. So there's that recognition that some of that shift in investment for millennials and leadership development, the next generation leader that was so important as an internal stressor. We see some of the strategies here emerging as to where CEOs think their organizations need to go to be successful.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me, especially from the coaching side. As you know, we've been doing coaching research at the Conference Board for over 10 years, and that investment, awareness of benefit and value of coaching has only increased over the last decade. So it's really great to see the prominence of that and the value of that on the CEO's mind as well. So that definitely helps.
Right. And interesting on sustainability, we'll see a little bit later what the CEO view of a successful or a sustainable organization in 2025. Sure, it's a growth driver. We see on the customer, their view of the future customer that they're recognizing a preference for sustainably produced products, things like that. But it's interesting to note that there's a clear recognition that sustainability is an important tool in recruitment and retention. That surprised us a little bit, but it was interesting. It's interesting to see that the notion around sustainability revolves not so much around green technology, if you will, or the environment, but it's really about people and the people within the organization. That focus, I think, was a little bit of a surprise for us when it comes to defining sustainability.
Yeah.
So we asked. I find this one a really interesting, an interesting take into the mind of CEOs, if you will. But we asked them about their confidence levels and how confident they are that their organizations currently have the right characteristics to succeed in 2025. And the overall confidence levels. This is on a scale of 1 to 10. Just below at 7. And about there, we thought was fairly high, and you can see the HR executives and are a little less confident than the CEOs are in pretty much in all of these issues, from leaders and talent and culture, structure, and the same was true for CFOs too. That their confidence levels were slightly below the CEO levels. But I think what concerned us or what caught our attention was the relatively high levels of confidence in having the right culture in place now to be able to succeed in 2025. And it seems to be contrary to what we hear from our members almost all the time about the notion of culture and a digital transformation is the part that lags behind, is the hardest, is the heavy lift. Yet, and how that needs to change, how organizations need to transform. Yet the CEOs feel fairly confident right now that culture exists within their organizations. And I think that's kind of a call that's a bit of a red flag in some ways as to whether maybe some more questions need to be asked within the organization about culture. Often there's a complacency issue that starts to creep in, especially we've as organizations have been doing well. That burning platform starts to fade away a little bit, and that notion of having a culture, that confidence level, to us we found a little disconcerting.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with you on that, which is the confidence level of, because we do a lot of research around evolving the culture of an organization, whether it's from an engagement perspective or leadership perspective or digitization perspective. A lot of that is only actionable if the culture supports it. And so we, to your point, hear a lot about how we're kind of not quite ready there. We're not ready. We're not there yet. We're thinking about it. We're working on it, but we're really not there yet. So I guess I suppose if they're at the helm of the ship, they have to feel confident about their organization, right, to keep leading. But like you said, perhaps a bit of a red flag. I mean, the good news is that we do hear from many of the organizations, and perhaps not the CEO, is that a lot of executives recognize the need for that culture to shift. And the problem is, even if you have a fabulous culture in your organization, because the world changes so quickly, the culture also needs to shift. So even if your culture is fabulous today and directed at the right things, it may not be the right things for 2025.
Right.
And so here we are once again trying to shift the culture to be ready for that. So it remains that challenge.
Yeah, very much so. And I think this kind of, it starts to explain maybe a little bit of where those confidence levels come from. So there's a difference between digitization, if you will, right, which is really basically those first two boxes, right? A few tweaks, adding digital elements to existing strategies or going digital piece by piece. That's digitization. Digital transformation, right, is that enterprise-wide solution. It's the change in go-to-business. It changes pretty much everything from skill levels required to who your competitors are to how you go to market. And if you look at, that notion of those first two boxes where the changes in leadership and organization are relatively minor, right? I mean, you're applying technologies to existing processes. Where the heavy lift comes and where most organizations are between those two, the transformation side and the digitization side, right? And because most organizations are stuck between those two boxes because those next steps require significant changes, not only in leadership and organizational structure, and then radical and disruptive change. So that's a hard lift, and we put some of that confidence level down to that notion of maybe not having clarity around the difference between digitization, that ad hoc application, and the digital transformation side.
Or they're confident in the easier work that they've taken on so far.
Right.
They haven't done the heavy lifting yet, but they're at least confident in what they've done so far, perhaps.
Right, and I think, and another part of that too, and if you're looking at it from an external or a customer perspective, right, a lot of organizations, when it comes to digital transformation, are far ahead with how they're dealing with their external customers versus how they're dealing with digital transformation inside their organization and their employees, right? So, and the employees are consumers on the outside, so they're expecting that level of service, of that experience, if you will, within the organization, and it's not there yet.
A good news is that, to your point, that many organizations are taking on the challenge, doing it in their own ways, whether it's a little bit or a little bit more or a lot. An example of that is one of the big research topics we'll be taking on this year in 2019, artificial intelligence in HR. Everybody knows artificial intelligence has existed for a while, especially in operations or manufacturing or on the factory lines or etc. But it's really hitting home in HR, and it's very big and prominent. And so we're doing a lot of investigations around that this coming year. And this is, I think, an example of HR taking it and hopefully moving it to the next level. Right. What does it mean for our own function, much less the rest of the organization?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when if you look back at that confidence slide on the HR executive side, the least confidence that they have is in the technology, right? It's just at about 6, right? It's a 6 confidence level. So yeah, the technology, we know it's not. We don't have it there yet, right? And the technology that exists today is not going to be the technology that's going to get them over the hill in 2025.
And let me expand on that with a quick question from the audience. So thank you for that. So does this mean understanding the touch points and what can be done to make the process more customer centric? And I'm assuming that's coming from an HR side. How can we make HR more customer centric? And I would say absolutely. Everything that we do from an external customer perspective, you basically apply the same technique to an employee. They just happen to be an internal customer, but it's the same customer view, that right. Customer centricity. So the ease of use that they expect on the outside of the company, they really expect. They expect Netflix, Uber, and Amazon inside the company. So right. Let's all go ponder that for a few minutes. I think about that from an HR perspective. That's hard. That's really hard. But that's what we're talking about.
And one of the big challenges, I think, when you talk about changing go-to-market models or that customer experience, enhancing customer experiences, which is in the CEO view, the most important outcome for technology in 2025 is going to be enhanced customer experience. So if you start to bring that, inside the house, that's that makes it even more challenging. But what's interesting about that is that when you start to go on the enhancing customer experience, the competitive field broadens, right? So it's the individual is looking for the same level of experience with Not if you're buying shoes, it's not the next person who sells shoes or the next, but it's the best online experience, digital experience that they've had, regardless of the industry sector, regardless of the product. That's the bar, the competitive bar that's set, and they expect everyone to meet that bar, and so that makes it much more difficult.
But it's completely the expectation for HR.
Right.
Think about that from a benefits perspective, a learning perspective. Anything that the employee needs to access, they want it that easy, that seamless, that just in time, and that valuable. As finding the best new pair of shoes online for a great price.
Right.
It's the same mentality, if you will.
And it's interesting from that Chicago meeting, the Strategic HR Joint Council meeting, that was one of the issues. The issues that Service was about, being customer centric within the HR organization. You need to take that external view that organizations have and bring it in house. Right? They felt the crowd, the wisdom of the crowd there really felt that was a critical part for future success in HR, and that brought in that notion of design thinking, right? In order to enhance that customer experience or employee experience, you need to have the employees' feedback, right? So you need the agile methodology, you need the design thinking side, and that was one of the key takeaways from that Chicago meeting, and it's reflected in the data here.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick question, and then we're going to really breeze it along for some of our other slides. How focused on artificial intelligence is the digitization aspect? So great question, because guess what? I would say it's all a hot mess. Digitization, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data learning, data analytics, it's all jumbled in there. And that's actually our effort this coming year, is try to make some sense of that. So stay tuned, and we will provide some clarity. What does artificial intelligence in HR mean? Of course, artificial intelligence requires analytics. Of course, it requires data. And how do we separate the noise to actually get to the source? So with that, let me turn it back to Chuck.
Okay, I think we've got another polling question.
Yes, please.
Around innovation. So
perfect. And so the control room, please. What will be the top 2 barriers or challenges to innovation within your organization in the future, meaning by 2025? The top 2 barriers to innovation. So if you could go ahead and select, and we'll give it about 5 more seconds. Okay, and maybe another 2, and if the control room can close it out, that would be great. Terrific. Okay, so you can see we have things like internal bureaucracy is actually the highest ranked here, and in fact, identically the same. Resource and cash on hand is a problem, of course, and legacy technology. Yes. I mean, those obviously make sense and resonate. Chuck?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's, let me just get these slides up here. Yeah. So, so we asked the question, what are the barriers that you see as to innovation today, and what are they going to be tomorrow? And I think this is an interesting chart. And I will say we did not put the CEO chart up here. They're a little different, but this is the HR view of barriers today. And if you look at, it's interesting to look at 2 notions, right? That talent and skills increases by 2025. That's going to be the biggest barrier in the mind of HR executives, and it also was in the mind of CEOs too. But when you look at the notion of regulation, regulation jumps up from near the bottom at 12 to 5 for the future, and the inability to measure innovation jumps up really high, and that's really an important part of. And we are doing a lot of work into measuring, being able to measure innovation. Signposts of Innovation project we have underway. That inability to measure innovation then starts to skew resource and investment decisions, right? If you can't measure properly, and we're not just talking about business outcomes. We're not talking about the patents, those sorts of things, but we're really talking about measuring the internal culture of the organization where we are, and that's what the signposts of innovation work is looking at. But you see that that's really going to be seen as a much bigger problem in 2025. And again, I think that has to do with how you start to resource issues. Some of the problems that are going to be fixed in 2025, the notion of legacy technology, the systems that won't talk to each other, that problem is going to become go down the scale a little
bit. We can only pray and hope.
We can only pray and hope. And it's interesting that internal bureaucracy, that our audience saw that as a bigger problem in 2025. While it's viewed today from the HR side as one of the top 5 problems, that gets solved by 2025. And I think a lot of that has to do, it goes back to if you take teams as the nexus of your work unit, and if you start to take away you make flatter organizations and you have the network to support those teams, that internal bureaucracy, the barriers melt away and it starts to go down. So in the view of our respondents to the survey, that internal bureaucracy is much of less of an issue. And the other notion, which I think and it speaks directly to inclusion, is the notion of leaders who do not promote idea sharing within their teams. Seen today as a problem, and we know that from our members' feedback that is an issue. But it's obvious, and it's something that a lot of work's being done on. And when you see in 2025, it goes right down to the bottom of the list. So developing those inclusive behaviors within organizations, within leaders today, a lot of work being done on that, and the expectations are that it's going to pay dividends in the future.
Sounds great. We can only hope.
We can only hope. So, and I really think there has been a lot of work, and there's been such a focus on it that there's a lot of confidence out there that's one issue that is going to go away. And I think that's great. So we also asked the hallmarks of a successful company and its management and its approach to managing human capital in the future. And it's about in the mind of the CEOs, it's about holding leaders accountable for engagement. And those engaging cultures, not especially to attract and retain talent. Engagement is a critical issue, but it's also a critical issue to drive business impacts, right? So you see that as pretty much across the board as key issues. On the HR side, and also interestingly enough in Europe and in China, the agile fluid project teams. That's going to be the hallmark of success for future companies, and very much on the minds of HR executives. That's where the future lies, right? That's going to be a really critical aspect. They too also see that leadership accountability as being really, really, really important too, right? You see also in the minds of HR executives that the greater reliance on coaching, which is ranked 7th for them, a little higher than it is for CEOs globally. It's 9th for CEOs globally. The one little cautionary flag that we have on this is the last rated issue by CEOs, and that's that removal of bias from data. And it's also low on the HR executive list. And the only reason that I call this out is that hearing from our diversity and inclusion councils, and calling to mind just that a couple of months ago where Amazon had to relook at its AI screening algorithms for resumes. The algorithm was based on past success criteria for managers within Amazon. There were a lot of keywords that were, if you will, male-oriented within the algorithm screening, and they found while they were in beta that it was eliminating, it was perpetuating the gender bias within their hiring process, right? And from what we hear from our D&I folks, that this is going to be a focus in the coming years, is having a look at not only how the algorithms themselves are constructed, but the underlying data from which they're constructed. What historical biases have gone into the construction of those data sets, and then what is it perpetuating as we go forward? I mean, you can think of an obvious case of going to where you recruit at what schools, at what universities, and you have your success criteria; those schools fit it, but the underlying bias in that data construction is eliminating a lot of potential talent. And in tight labor markets where you need to be more inventive in where and how you recruit. That notion of bias within the data, I think, is really important.
100% that issue is going to be huge in artificial intelligence and HR. So many possibilities of concerns and biases that could arise. So stay tuned. We'll definitely take that on a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the D&I function is going to become really good friends with the CIO and the IT side, right? So yeah, going forward. So we talked a little bit about investing in leaders, right? And where that investment needs to be seen, and in the views in the eyes of CEOs. It's formal leadership training. It's interesting, the work we've done with millennials. That again is a very highly effective strategy for millennials, right? That they feel that the formal leadership training development is important, but so is the cross-functional rotational experiences. And then here, I think it's great is the focus on more diverse leadership. A real notion about diversity and inclusion coming together on this, and you can see on the HR side that's their number 2 ranking after the cross-functional experiences. So I think that's a really good sign. One of the things we do flag is which rated 6th on this list of 9. Is that providing more exposure to digital experiences for executives, and that kind of goes. It gets to a notion that we've heard from our own members about in a digital world, right, where digital skills, where you hire for a particular digital skill, and in 18 months to 2 years that skill is outdated, right? So what you need is this sense of continuous learning. You need to continue to evolve the workforce. I mean, Cisco was one example of where they've taken resources into really heavily focused on evolving their existing workforce and recreating their skills rather than going out, on the free agent market, if you will, paying a high price for a skill that is outdated in 18 months. You just need to do that continuous development, and exposing leaders to those digital experiences is really a critical part of that evolvement. And it's a little bit low on the list, but it's just something that we thought would be important to flag.
AT&T, I think, is another example, really taking on that reskilling challenge for hundreds of thousands of employees as a critical need. But please go on. We only have a few minutes left.
Right. So we just wanted to look at, we asked about what an inclusive organization is going to look like in 2025, and it's about a speak up culture, but those numbers that are circled are divergent between with HR and CEOs think. So CEOs, a little softer view of it creates a sense of belonging. More than a third, 36% of the CEOs think that's going to be a critical aspect of a truly inclusive organization going forward, but it's not so much in the minds of HRs. What really is more important vis-a-vis is creating that physically safe workplace. And I think what's really important, what's really interesting was that relatively low ranking by CEOs of eliminating unconscious bias within the workforce, right? So, maybe we can tie that back to the bias within the digital the data sets and algorithms. But it's much more important in the minds of HR executives here when it comes to inclusion is that elimination of unconscious bias. And we know that that's something that again a lot of organizations are working towards, right? But I think both sides, when you look at CEO and HR side, is that what's going to define an inclusive organization is those opportunities for continuous learning. Right, they really see that as an important HR strategy to develop an inclusive organization, and that inclusiveness is a theme that kind of runs through this whole survey from the CEO view, because we talk a lot about improving transparency, about improving information sharing. So it's a big it's a big issue, and you can see that that providing those cross-functional opportunities too are really important, and continuous learning, that all kind of meshes together.
Yeah. And I do know that obviously, we've been looking at some of this work for a while, and many of us are in this work in the inclusion space. It definitely continues to be a struggle. When we look at some issues that we may not be able to seem to make a huge, significant impact on, like women in leadership roles, for example, continues to be a challenge for all of us, and other research studies that we continue to do. So it's just great to see that we're keeping it on the minds of the CEOs, and hopefully, some of these other elements that are perhaps lower may rise higher on the list for them.
Right. No, good point. Really good point. So we did talk a little bit about sustainability, and I just think what is interesting, again, I talked about a little bit earlier, was it's not about the environment, it's not about green technology. It's about really what the view is. Are you going to be around for the next 30 years or 50 years as an organization, and what is that going to require? And what it really requires in the minds of CEOs is engaged employees, happy employees, if you will, right? So, they're number two on this, the high quality employee experience through the life cycle of the employee, very high. And then leveraging sustainability as a talent strategy. They kind of trump the notion of sustainable products, of circular economies, those kind of, what a lot of organizations think of traditionally, or a lot of people think of traditionally as sustainability issues related to environment, where in the minds of CEOs here, it's about the people within the organization. I think that's really an important takeaway from this whole survey.
That's different. That is different from what we've seen in sustainability research, and also thinking about employee engagement. What struck me as I was thinking about this new data was around the mission and purpose of an organization, and we know that drives significant value for all employees, especially the millennial population, and we've shown that in a lot of our engagement research. And I think sustainability for me drives into the same bucket around that. That it's around how you're sustaining, how you're treating your employees and your customers, right? What is the mission and purpose of your organization, and as it drives that from a sustainable perspective, will your organization be around? To your point, right. If you're not a good company, you're not going to be around in the future. And so all of that ties in for me into this aspect, but very interesting that they also view it from an internal employee perspective.
Yeah, and and the intent is to get it done, right? That small box in the corner there about linking executive compensation to value creation. 2/3 see that is going to be a hallmark of the future, right? That's going to be linked to the compensation. People are going to get rewarded for driving these behaviors, and that's the big thing. So, just wanted to highlight some of the what we think is blind spots that appeared in the survey throughout, right? And when we asked about inclusion, right, the near bottom of the list, with only 7% of CEOs thinking that mandating equal pay for equal work would be a hallmark of an inclusive organization in the future. What we know from our work is that closing that gender pay gap is critical to maintaining diversity and succession planning even within the workforce when it comes to women. So,
but it's really low on the list.
It's low on the list, and that was a little disappointing, a little surprising for us, if you will. And this, linked to that is that lower work-life balance. Again, not seen as a big hallmark of a future success, but yet again, that work-life balance is also something that relates back to gender issues too. That's a lot of why women drop out of the workforce, right? And when you look at millennials and generations that follow, work-life balance is still important, life stage regardless. That notion of the engagement and inclusion, that lower rankings of the unconscious bias, some fundamentals, transparent conflict resolution, consistent application of rules, They're all fairness issues and they're transparency issues, and then they're cornerstones of an inclusive and engaging culture, and they were fairly lowly ranked. Was cause for concern. On the innovation side, CEOs didn't believe having an insular culture or a lack of diversity or inclusion teams as important obstacles to innovation either now and in the future. Yet what we hear, the feedback constantly, and especially at the speed of digital transformation, where those external boundaries need to melt away. You need to co-create. You need to co-create with customers, with non-traditional partners. That's gone away, and that's not much of a concern. And as we talked to earlier, the rewarding teams, the complementary strategy to forming and to having agile teams is the workforce nexus. They're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
Right. So just one question that we did ask was, okay, HR, how's your job going to change in the future? And it will change primarily as a result of. And as you can see, right, we talk a lot about the notion of being more strategic, and our respondents see that as probably one of the biggest changes for the drivers for how their job changes. That the organizations will be restructured. Their jobs are going to change, and the department will have a different role. And I think maybe you can link that back to being more strategic.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ways that they see the drivers of their job changing. Interestingly enough, few see the emphasis on technology skills as being one of the primary changers. I think that may be a little cause for concern. Mm-hmm. We're still in the people business, right? So that automation of tasks, they do not see, and we're assuming this is a pretty high level of respondent that's on the strategic side of the house, if you will. So the automation of those tasks, that's probably to be understood. For their specific job. This ask was not about the function, but their specific jobs. So, right. And 7% don't think their job's going to change at all.
That's interesting.
It is indeed. It is indeed. So, so just to wrap up, so this goes back, and we talked a lot about this. This is from our strategic HR conference in Chicago, and these are the main takeaways, and they fit in with the responses that we've gone over here in the C-Suite Challenge Survey. But the main thing is HR being willing to disrupt itself, right? Framing questions, challenges in the new paradigms, right? As digital transformation, as everything changes within an organization, framing those questions within the new paradigms. Having a digital strategy of one's own. This is that notion of digitization, applying technology to specific processes. Here, you need to, HR needs, and it needs to be aligned obviously with the business strategy, but the function itself needs a comprehensive strategy. It can't just be applying data technology ad hoc. That managing digital transformation requires empathy. It's important to remind everybody that it's about the evolution of jobs, not the elimination of jobs. It's the continuous training side. And again, we talked a little bit about these earlier on. This is the view of the HR executives, 250 from our meeting, as to what they think is coming trends in the HR function. And that's design thinking, putting yourself in the customer's shoes, as Amy, you were talking about earlier. The notion of agile coming to HR, right? And some interesting examples we do have of some HR functions that are using agile methodology to roll out programs and be successful, avoiding big high level mistakes by being more agile and taking in the design thinking part. And that notion of being able to recognize and reward work in teams. Seen as critical, as a critical important. We talked about evolving talent. Do you hire for skill? Do you hire for attitude? And that notion of continuous learning as part of the attitude, right? That's really important. Contingent workers, we didn't talk, and it was kind of low on the list of CEOs and HR executives, right? But one thing that did surface in this meeting is overcoming the notion of an us versus them attitude in contingent workers. And as we know, renting those skills is going to become more important. How you engage contingent workers to maximize the performance is important, and the notion of the biased algorithms, which we talked about in detail. An issue that's going to be driven from the D&I side of the house, and from the feedback we get from our members, it's going to be a big issue for them in the coming years. So.
Yeah, no, Chuck, it's just a fire hose of data. Thank you. I hope the audience sort of can synthesize at their own leisure. You think about the concepts that we summarized, right? The teams, agility, inclusion, sustainability. What I like the way you said, it's about evolution of jobs. What's the evolution of our jobs, right? That's, I think, interesting, and we can take that away and think about that. So just because we're completely out of time, I wanted to thank you, the audience, for joining us for this Human Capital Watch. I want to invite you for next month, where we will be talking about defining and measuring inclusion. So again, just extending the inclusionary topic from today, lots to think about from a 2019 C-suite perspective. Appreciate you joining us.